my name is Jennifer Smith Parker, Director of Insights at Biospace, and you're listening to Denatured. In this episode, you'll hear from Hilary Rosselot, Executive Director at the National Fragile X Foundation, and Jordi Fàbrega, co-founder and CEO at CONNECTA Therapeutics. We'll discuss the future of Fragile X research and why the field has struggled to translate scientific promise into clinical progress, and what it will take to finally break through. Hilary and Jordi, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. Very curious to hear what you both have to say about Fragile X. So if you can introduce yourselves, that would be great. Hilary, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Thanks so much, Jennifer, for having us both on your podcast. Like you said, my name is Hilary Rosselot, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Fragile X Foundation, which is the oldest and longest running international national nonprofit focused on Fragile X.
Perfect. Jordi?
Yeah, thank you for having me, Jennifer. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Jordi Fàbrega. I'm co-founder and CEO of CONNECTA Therapeutics. CONNECTA Therapeutics is a biotech company based in Barcelona, and we are developing new treatments for unmet medical needs in the CNS. And our leading program is a first-in-class molecule, CTH120, currently in phase 2 clinical trials in Fragile X.
Perfect. Let's start defining Fragile X for our audience. What is the disease about? What are some of its symptoms? Anything along that line to kind of set the scene.
Jordi, you should fill in from a
Definitely.
scientific perspective. So
Okay.
I should probably tell everybody I am not a researcher or a clinician, just a passionate patient advocate. So let's see. Fragile X is a genetic and hereditary condition. Usually when you hear Fragile X, we're talking about Fragile X syndrome, which is a rare disease component of the condition. It's the most common single gene link to autism and the most common hereditary genetic form of intellectual and developmental disability. So people with Fragile X may have learning differences, behavioral challenges, but they're also loads of fun, have incredible visual memory skills, great senses of humor. And what's interesting about Fragile X is there are associated conditions that are attached to the premutation or the carrier condition of Fragile X, which is becoming, I think, perhaps a little bit more widely known in other genetic conditions. But when I entered the space, this was novel in Fragile X. And so you see things like tremor ataxia condition associated with the premutation, as well as a primary ovarian insufficiency. It's an X-linked condition, so it's on the X chromosome. And so you'll see differences in the presentation between males and females because this FMR1 gene helps create this protein that's integral in many of the functions of daily life. And so whether you're making no protein trace or maybe a bit because your other X has sort of this functional FMR1 gene, that impacts the presentation of Fragile X syndrome.
So let's talk about a bit more serious now after that great initial setting the scene for Fragile X. It's seen a number of failed trials over the years. So from both the patient and the company side, what do you think has been the main reason progress has been so difficult?
Okay, so Fragile X biology is complex, as with many neurodevelopmental conditions, so it's not easy to tackle. From our understanding, from our point of view, the main reason is that the previous development programs focus on a single molecular targets, but we understand that restoring brain function may require broader and more pleiotropic approaches. This is what our case with CTA, which acts as neuroplasticity modulation properties of the brain, a property that is affecting the vast majority of neurodevelopmental disorders. So this is one reason. The other reason may be that many trials rely heavily on caregiver-reported outcomes, okay, which are valuable but can lead to placebo effects, and it's what causes some clinical trials to fail. In any case, rather than failures, what we see is previous studies should be viewed as important learning experience, and these lessons are shaping better design clinical trials today.
Yes, so well said. I mean, I just want to reiterate every point you just made, Jordi. Both of us just left the National Fragile X Foundation's 20th International Fragile X Conference, and this conversation just came up. And what we landed on is that while there have been these negative trials or these failures, we're always learning, and it sets us up so well for how to change and adapt for the next trial. But I think in terms of there's potential placebo effect, which is not uncommon, especially in rare diseases. And we certainly see that in Fragile X. And we have some work to do on nailing down endpoints and considering what might work in terms of performance-based outcome measures or biomarkers or things that complement or better support in addition to those caregiver reported outcome measures. So there's a lot of interest and work being done, but we've certainly had a lot of heartache
Yeah.
along the way. And I think that's
Yeah.
fair to say too.
And I think you make the last 2 points, actually, are a very nice segue into the next questions, Hilary, in that one of the recurring challenges, as you mentioned, seems to be endpoint selection of placebo effects. So what kind of outcome measures do you think are most credible for Fragile X going forward?
Yeah, what a good question. I mean, I think it's a combination of many things, and there's probably not one perfect outcome measure, just like there's not one going to probably be one perfect treatment for Fragile X syndrome, given the heterogeneity of the condition. But I think performance-based or direct assessment outcome measures are great because they take out some of the subjectivity that we all have, whether we're a clinician reporter or a parent reporter. Things like EEGs, right? Or if we can establish firmer biomarkers in Fragile X syndrome, I think that would be fabulous. But I do believe there's always going to be a place for these caregiver or self-reported measures
Sure.
because ultimately you're the one
Yes.
experiencing the change. So
Yeah, I completely agree with Hilary. Difficult question to answer because the endpoint selections also depends on the mechanism of action of the drug. So this is something to take into consideration. But in all cases, as Hilary said, when defining the clinical endpoints, you need to have a multidimensional approach. So having caregivers and patient report outcomes are very important because there you capture the meaningful changes in daily living and real world functioning. But also you need independent clinical perspective. So you need clinical rate outcomes in this sense. And especially important right now is the objective functional assessments like EEG or eye tracking, actigraphy. There are some of them already that have been used in different clinical trials that are less vulnerable to placebo effects. So this is important. And of course, at this moment, we don't have a clear biomarker in blood and plasma that will be perfect, but it's something that I think in the next years we will find some.
Yeah, I think it's perfect what you're saying upon building the past knowledge. I mean, even though past trials have not been successful, you have learned so much and
Mhm.
especially how to address this condition, as you mentioned, both of you, the variability behind that. So let me ask you on that point. So when you think about the core symptoms of Fragile X and the huge variability, what about designing trials for adults versus children?
I can start with that. Okay, yes. Although all patients share the same genetic mutation, the clinical presentations are different. So stratification is a key element to consider during the clinical trials design. Although current stratification often includes gender and age, that is important because maybe the goals differs across the lifespan. But the additional factors should be also considered, no, as like cognitive ability, behavior profile, symptom severity, and also coexisting conditions. So all this stratification has to be considered while defining clinical trials because it's really important.
So well said. I mean, inherent to Fragile X is the variability, and I think the best designs, right, account for that. And yes, variability is in human nature, right? We're all unique, but the trends in Fragile X are why we can even have trials. And I think that's an important message for both families and researchers, right? We want to pull out those trends or those symptom profiles and get the best shot on goal. I know I hear that phrase a lot, and maybe you don't fit into that inclusion criteria in this trial
Yes.
right now, but it is so well intentioned that the design is trying to find the most homogenous group to track that change and then broaden the indication as we move forward. So, and then Jordi pointed this out beautifully that there's so much differentiation in terms of age and what the focus or unmet need is. And so I think just designing the program in a way that pulls that information along with the complement of what you're trying to achieve movement on is really the key.
Yeah, that does make sense. Now, you've both talked about the patient aspect, and obviously, with a patient advocacy group, Hilary, you'll have very deep
Yeah.
insights into this. So, we know that patient support clearly matters beyond the trial itself. So, what are the biggest unmet needs families raise most often, especially as patients age into adulthood?
Yeah, this is like the question I think that we get asked the most often. from our perspective. So, I mean, if you zoom out, patient advocacy organizations are critical to any community, right? Because they're the place where you land. They give you good, unbiased information. They provide you with community. They're there to celebrate the wins, but also just hear you, right? When you need to talk about the hard stuff too. And I think that's the beauty of communities like ours. But yeah, I mean, if you're talking about the biggest unmet needs across the lifespan, especially as we age into adulthood, you sort of zoom out from Fragile X specific challenges, right? Things that maybe you're approaching at school age or in IEP meetings, et cetera. And you're looking at what lots of broader IDD communities are looking at, which is what does employment look like? What does independence look like? And certainly this big question of what happens when the parent or caregiver is gone. And so if we can find treatments, right, that address these lifelong trajectory questions and provide support, I think that's really what people are looking for ultimately. So obviously gains in any and all aspects are fabulous, but if we can solve that burning question that keeps people up at night, what happens when I'm gone, I think that would be a huge win.
So you're positioning Jordi as CTH120 as a neuroplasticity modulator with potential disease
Yes.
modifying effects. Why is that mechanism attractive in Fragile X? And what evidence gives you confidence?
So CTH120 targets a new mechanism of action. In fact, it targets the TRKB, that's tropomyosin receptor kinase B pathway. So it's a new mechanism have been never tested in Fragile X syndrome. So in this sense, it's something we can add to the development community. Pathway is a key regulator of synaptic function, neural connectivity, and neuroplasticity. Okay, neuroplasticity is a property of the brain that is affected much not a lot of neurodevelopment conditions. And by recovering neuroplasticity, you recover also a lot of the clinical manifestations in Fragile X. And we are quite confident in this sense because we have a strong preclinical evidence in animal models acting both in cognition and behavioral Fragile X manifestation that is really good. And also we have encouraging early human safety data with a very safe profile and some insights of CNS activity in healthy volunteers during phase 1. I don't know if phase 2 results will provide the answer, but we are quite confident that it will work.
Great. And then Jordi, where are you at in development at this point? What's the next stage?
Yeah, we have a phase 2 clinical trial ongoing in Spain. Okay, we have involved two of the major hospitals here. They have a lot of experience in Fragile X community. One of them has the biggest unit in Fragile X patients. So at this moment we are recruiting. We have already some participants recruited. So, and we are expecting to have top line results next year. So very exciting moments.
Okay. Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Hilary, I don't know if you're going to say something. You have a big smile on your face. So
No, this is music to my ears. I'm just quietly giving you the thumbs up over here. Yeah.
fantastic. So you've both mentioned the importance of working across the lifespan of Fragile X. So how do you think about the sequencing of adult and pediatric development? I mean, is there a certain point where it switches of the symptoms or the care, or it tends to be more of a gradual trajectory?
I mean, sometimes how do you tackle the different ages? It depends of the regulatory pathway. Okay,
Okay.
because with new molecules as ours, adults are required to be studied first, where you establish all the safety, the dosing, the dose, and you look for early efficacy signals. This is important. And then you move to children. For us, it's very important as early intervention could produce greater and more durable benefits. So pediatric studies require especially careful safety evaluation. That's why we are going first in adults and then going to the pediatric population. Both programs inform one to other. Adult studies optimize dosing, improve safety, and guide the pediatric development. So in this case, in our case, we have already started a pediatric development plan. Okay, we have performed all the toxicology studies, and we are foreseeing a future pediatric clinical trial. And also, we have reproductive toxicology studies in place, also to include females, which shall be in potential in the next future. So we are very inclusive in this way. We want to include all the Fragile X community.
And I think from my perspective, they're both great populations to study and
Sure.
many people flex. I think Jordi said it best, right? That many groups start in adults because of the safety data, because you can provide proof of concept. And then I think the other argument is that with children, they potentially have the greatest benefit given just the longer term you have with them, but you need to typically establish pretty good safety profile in order to do that. And so some groups make the argument to start in the pediatric population, but
Right.
you
There's
know,
no
I think
right or wrong,
yeah,
essentially, here.
exactly. From my perspective, there's no wrong place to start. And we just appreciate you starting. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
It's a fair point. So looking ahead, what would success look like for the Fragile X field over the next few years? Is it just a first approved therapy full stop? Is it better biomarkers? You mentioned a bit about that, Jordi. More reliable endpoints, or simply a more sustainable trial ecosystems? There's a lot to pack in there.
I mean, my answer is yes. I don't know.
The above.
Yes, all of the above. Of course, our families have been waiting for that therapy, right, to cross the finish line for a long time. But as I mentioned before, I don't think any of us are convinced that one therapy, especially one that targets a specific symptom, is going to be the end all be all. And so being able to set up sort of the foundational pieces of research that we need in order to move many treatments forward is key. That's where the biomarkers come in, the more reliable endpoints, the sustainable trial ecosystem. And I think what I'll say selfishly is that we've built really good programs, especially at the National Fragile X Foundation, to support you in doing this work, to leverage the learning we've had from all these trials. And we have a really robust clinical trials committee that's there to help guide you as you design your program, preclinical through execution of your trial. And we have a sort of parallel group in our family advisory committee where you can get that lived experience feedback. And so one of my favorite things about this community is that they talk to one another, the professionals and the families, and that's where I ultimately think there's going to be success. So I'm very hopeful. And I think CONNECTA is doing a great job of like embodying all the things that I've just referenced.
Also very optimistic because I think the environment is there. I mean, we have the community that is engaged and supportive in the clinical trials. That is also thanks to a National Fragile X Foundation and other associations that really have very good activities and supporting families and also engaging all the stakeholders involved. So I foresee all of them. I mean, but if I need to choose one, well, I see in the next future a first approved therapy that will be a major milestone for everybody. It is not simply to approve a drug, but also to deliver therapies that produce a meaningful improvement in daily functioning, independence, learning, communication quality across the lifespan. Maybe the first drug will be not the drug that will solve all the manifestations, but probably will be a good point to validate the field, no? To start, the drug will start and others will come over again. We are much better positioned today than it was a decade ago because now we have a deeper understanding of the biology, improved trial methodologies, biomarkers, and a stronger partnership with the Fragile X community. It's very important.
Perfect. I always like ending a podcast on a very optimistic note. So this is perfect. So thank you so much, Jordi. Thank you so much, Hilary, for joining this episode of Denatured. It's been fascinating. If you'd like to listen to more episodes, please turn to biospace.com or shoot me an email to send me a pitch at jennifer.smith-parker@biospace.com. Thank you very much.